Please welcome Joel to the S4 stage.
All right. How's everybody doing this morning? I've heard nothing but good things all week about this track, so hopefully I won't let you down. Today what we're going to do is we're kind of going to have a little bit of fun. I always like to teach a little when I talk, and the intent of what we're going to do for the next 30 minutes is to actually go through a live breach investigation, forensics analysis, and remediation. Because the purpose here is to kind of teach, and it's really interesting concurrently right now, actually starting at about 11:30. In the main stage, there's another group that's going to talk about threat intelligence. One of the things we're going to talk about and learn how to develop yourself is a threat intelligence toolkit, so that when you're in the field, you have the ability to be able to use reasonable threat feeds in doing analysis of raw data. So let's get started with that. I'll go past the introduction. This is a real site. I had a very generous customer that allowed this to be publicly presented, provided I protect their identity. So there's going to be some redaction that you'll see. Pretty much around one screen with name and the rest of them with IP addresses. But this is an actual case study. They had a remote site. They're a major utility provider in the northeast part of the United States. They had, ages ago, they acquired an area where there was a manufactured gas plant. And today they have groundwater issues, so they needed to put in remediation equipment in order to monitor and take care of the groundwater from those contaminants. So it has all the aspects of a true advanced remote access scenario. We needed daily logs and reports to be generated. We needed access to remote operational graphics. And we needed the ability to occasionally, not all the time, but occasionally modify logic in the PLC. So we have all the pieces of something that can either be very well secured or very unsecured, which introduces a lot of residual risk. So it all starts with a piece of packaged equipment. Now there's skid systems for every industry to do a lot of these really simple aspects of an integrated manufacturing process. One I'm most familiar with is something like an instrument air skid. But this particular company created this package that bundles everything you would love to have. It's got a nice little local HMI panel. That's a smart panel, manufactured by Automation Direct. It has integrated web services, so you can access it remotely. It has email capabilities, so it can send you logs. It has direct connectivity to Allen Bradley PLCs. And that tells you all these great details, and lo and behold, it also has either 3G, 4G, LTE connectivity to the remote users in the site. So here we are. I'm being called in to do an investigation because concurrently there happens to be a cyber exercise on the other side of the Atlantic where the company saw their name show up on Shodan. Now everybody in here has used Shodan. Shodan is a very powerful tool. John has done a wonderful job with this. But what happens with Shodan is there's a lot of ways to look at risk. But when I start considering sites and what's exposed, I don't tend to start with vulnerabilities. I don't count vulnerabilities. I don't use CVSS scores. I start with how attractive is this target? Because that starts to correlate more into that very gray area called likeliness. How likely is somebody to attack this? Well, if your company name was up there, and I'll just use, since I said it's on the East Coast, let's use somebody like Pacific Gas and Electric. If up there in this banner, right here, Pacific Gas and Electric showed up on Shodan, you're going to have a lot of people very interested in coming and visiting the site. So Shodan has a lot of markers that it looks at. In the top left, you'll see that the site also got tagged as an industrial control system. So now you can just use a free subscription to Shodan, go in, type industrial control system, and lo and behold, my client's site's going to show up. And then it also on the right typically gives you the services that it's characterized on this particular, when it does its crawling of this particular IP address. We see we have FTP running on port 21. Again, if you go back a slide, sure enough, that vendor provides that capability. Now there's an interesting story on the FTP. We knew the site was compromised and there was malware on that site. Up until yesterday, I thought that that was actually placed there by an adversary. what we found out, Ron Bash, who's here with the Adolis team, actually discovered that Automation Direct was shipping these products with malware already on that FTP site. So that's always nice to have, right? So we've got all the indicators of a very attractive site, something that people want to attack. So what I do is it's like, cool. I then get out my toolkit. I have a very straightforward set of tools I use to help further enumerate that site. And then what I'll show later is I've moved all that automation into Nessus Professional. So now I use Nessus custom plugins that I write to do the same thing. But effectively what I'm doing is I'm querying using hping, where you can structure your packet to look for the remaining ports that are open on that device. The reason I like hping is even if there's a firewall in play, this will traverse the firewall if it matches a rule, right? Because it's the first part of the three-way handshake, so it's gonna let the SYN packet through to its target if the firewall's in play. So very powerful tool. I'm sure many of you know how to use it. It's great. Now what comes out are two very important ports. These are ports that Shodan did not characterize, but these are the ports that represent the greatest risk to this particular site, because these are the ports that allow modification of control logic and operational graphics. So now we've got even a bigger puzzle here that we're trying to piece together. But from a risk exposure standpoint, we have a serious problem. So I asked the customer, I said, okay, let's not panic. It's there. I'm almost certain there's people that are playing around in there, but please let me collect data. Give me a few days. I put in a little inline data collection mechanism. You know, I use various tools. Tiny, the smallest one's one of the little net gates. I wish they still made that metal one. And the bigger one's got a little bit more horsepower. And I just put it in line, and I want to see who's coming into this site and what are they doing. Again, very simple. I use TCP dump. There's a write command in there. One thing that's nice about TCP dump is the -G option. Is what I want to do is I want to close that PCAP file every so often so that if after 2 or 3 days something would happen, it would get corrupted, I wouldn't lose all the data. So I usually set this to close the file every 8 hours so that you get an assembly of PCAPs, and then you can use merge cap to bring those all together. So what happened in 5 days? Blew my mind. So again, remember, this is a teeny tiny site, but we have an attractive characteristic of the major company, right? Not Pacific Gas and Electric. That's why I say we'll use, I just want to put a name in there. 3,100 unauthorized accesses in this short window of time. Okay, so we know how to collect the data, but let's really start to go into how we can take that PCAP and further explore what was going on. Because again, the purpose here is to develop what I call my network security analysis tool. So we're going to put together a few extra tools and show how we're going to share information between the various tools in order to create a threat picture. We want to see how bad things really are. So step one is data analysis. On the right are going to be all the tools that are in this network security analysis toolkit. So I use various tools for doing packet analysis, flow analysis, and most importantly, I want to do some threat analysis as well. So the tools on the right will kind of walk through it. The purpose here is we need to do attribution. I need to find out, A, who's in that site and what did they do, okay? And we're going to have this slide, plus this will all be videoed, so don't worry about it going fast. And if anybody's interested in seeing this, we can do this today. We've got a couple days left. So the 3,100 hits, unauthorized hits, those hits were inside the security perimeter. So in this particular architecture, remember it could support 4G LTE, Verizon or AT&T were the providers. There's a little Sierra wireless modem in there. Of course, now this vendor, you would have thought, would have maybe done a little bit of configuration of the Sierra wireless because it does have some basic capability. They left it stock, right? So everything that hits the public IP is going to get routed to the device that would match the port translation that would occur. So if it was an 80 or a 443, it might go to the panel. But what's really scary, if you start to move it to something like Ethernet IP on 44818, it turns around and it'll go to the PLC. So this is the map. And all I did was take the PCAP file, ran it through, and I'll show you how I ran it through SCADAhacker, and then fed the results of SCADAhacker into Splunk. I love Splunk, absolutely love Splunk, and I'll tell you here, everything that I'm showing is free. So there's advantages to paying for these products, but for this kind of an exercise, I didn't need to pay for anything because I stayed under the limits of Splunk. It gives me a nice geomap of all the actors. So now the real hard part becomes getting to this. How do you find the adversaries that were in the original 3,100 unauthorized hits? And actually unauthorized access steps. So now we're going to start to parse this data out. And what's always fun about giving this brief is that if DHS would have been called in to do an investigation, they classify the data. So nobody learns on this, right? So the purpose here is to identify these guys are serious. We're going to go through some TTPs and some indicators of what they're doing, and you're going to be very impressed. So many people use Grass Marlin. I wish that they would have finished it. I mean, it's a great tool because the one thing Grass Marlin provides is flow data. It's really nice to get an understanding on your network very easily of who's talking to whom. And then, of course, you can click on any of the targets and get the details of what ports and services were being used. But what's really interesting here is, of course, the center is the actual system. So we'll kind of zoom in on the center. So what we had at that site was the Sierra Wireless modem that owned the public IP address, the little automation direct Seymour panel that had the web server, FTP server, and email services, and a Rockwell Micrologix 1400. So they all had PLCs, and that's kind of what I'm showing in here. So this is the map of all of those people coming into these sites. That's why on the previous slide, everybody is centered around the site because that's what we're doing. We were monitoring this from inside that network. So there I am. I accessed the site 3 ways from 2 different remote access methods. One of them was using, I was using a phone in a mobile hotspot while I was on site. Another one was in my hotel, and then the third one was when I plugged into the network. What absolutely blew my mind, that computer, the me, that's up there with the .100 on it, was on that network no more than 10 minutes. And they actually found me and started to attack my asset. So these are not signs of somebody that's just playing around. These are signs of some advanced TTPs. So what we want to do is we want to start to further analyze that data. So when you see the people that started to hit me, it's nice because Grass Marlin will give you an indicator of where that IP is supposed to be registered from. Now, I'm not saying that China was attacking me, but I am saying with high confidence that the IP address that was attacking me was originating in China. So one guy really wanted to challenge me. He said, why would they ever make it known that they're attacking you from China? Well, there's a lot of people that do that. So we had a lot of indicators here of some very advanced techniques that were being used. This was the one that really put the hair on the back of my neck up, was seeing them interact with the PLC using UDP across a fully routed internet session. They did a really good job. So we were able to take, since we had that capture, we could go in and see what they were doing to the PLC. So using now the details aspect of Grass Marlin, you see the light blue tall column was me because I wanted to make sure that the capability existed. So when I was remote, I would go in and interact with the PLC. I had all the software, I had my RS Logics, and all of those tools on my computer. So I was able to establish pretty solid sessions. Those guys on the right were actually the adversary doing something very similar. So this was signs of somebody that really was targeting this system. The next thing I want to do is I use a very powerful tool called Network Miner. Because the one thing Wireshark does not do well is help you understand sessions. So Grass Marlin shows you flows. Wireshark shows you packets, incredible detail around packets, but it doesn't have the ability to understand who's the client and who's the server. So I always give an example. You could take a 100 meg file, load it into Wireshark in a matter of a couple seconds, load it into Grass Marlin in a couple more seconds, load it into Network Miner, and it might take 5 or 10 minutes because it's analyzing that data to create very important session information. So now you can see who's originating communications on what service port and what they're doing. Now, a lot of these service ports are easy, right? So we know 44818 is probably going to be the destination. So we know that that's actually the server side, and the client side would be the non-44818. But when you start to analyze data in unfamiliar territory, this tool will help you see the relationship between source and destination, or if you want to look at it, client and server. What's nice about the tool is it very quickly extracts a lot of pieces of information that are in that packet. For instance, credentials. Remember there was an FTP site on there. There was also a little web page that you can log into. None of that stuff required encryption, and on the right, sure enough, you dump all the usernames and passwords. So using this and the manual that the company provided, you can look up what the default username and password was for that Seymour panel. Okay, so once you log into the panel, it goes from a read-only view to a read-write view. Defaults. So, of course, that's not Automation Direct's problem. It's the integrator, this company that sells this awesome packet where they say they've got all these neat, slick features, and of course, one of them is a very secure remote access solution. It's not very secure. So when you go down here, you can now tell the people that really didn't even spend 30 seconds figuring out what the right username and password is. And of course, it's a really great one. It's user is the username, and the password is 1234. So the people that actually use that username and password did a little bit of recon, and I really do say it was a very little bit of recon. So now we know we have active impact. People have gone in, people have manipulated and interacted the PLC. Now again, we're keeping law enforcement out of it in this case. What we now want to do is we want to kind of understand a little bit about who's coming in. So now we move the packet analysis and flow analysis to threat analysis. So what I do is you can take, I really like SCADAhacker. SCADAhacker is, let's just call it, is a next generation snort. So they're typically used in IPS, IDS type scenarios, but you can use them offline. So here you are, you have this huge data stream, you've got these PCAP files, what do you do with it? So I've used this on multiple projects, and quickly, we're able to identify significant threats. And I'll share one once we get to the details on another project. So now what we do is we see the dashboard of threats that have been identified using the threat intelligence feeds from emerging threats. So I use that on my own security perimeter. It updates a couple times a day. So you just go in, and like on mine, I run Oinkmaster, and it'll go in and it'll run a crunch session that'll re-update all the feeds twice a day, like at noon and midnight. So now we have geolocation information of actors. What are they doing? So again, Splunk gives us a lot of flexibility. So I built several very straightforward dashboards that would allow me to do quick analysis of who it is and what they're doing. So it's very important to understand it was me and the client. Now, the client does exist in both the United States and overseas, so you're going to see some of their addresses coming from the second green arrow is the group overseas. So again, you're probably going to figure out who it is. But now we actually start to see where we're getting identification of threat. So of course, if this was a DHS briefing, this now classifies the brief, because now we have actually given definitive attribution of actor. So, is it significant? Absolutely, because with the volume of traffic that they were generating, it was not casual, okay? So how did this tool actually help us enumerate that they were threats? One thing that I am a firm, hardcore advocate for is reputation. I do not want anybody touching my perimeter that has bad reputation. So the threat feeds use reputation tools to help provide, you can configure them in a drop mode rather than an alert mode. But I'm telling you, I worked with several clients and they never used this basic feature on their perimeter. And they allowed actors that are known to be bad into their first level network. And you're like, why are you doing that? You can feed this stuff directly into your first step router. You could put it in even further, but these tools change dynamically. And part of this twice a day update, the IP addresses that are in these lists change. So there's two main groupings. The DShield blocked list are those IPs that they say you should drop, period. They are known, confirmed malicious sites that are either generating malicious traffic, hosting malware or command and control infrastructure, or providing mechanisms to support exploitation of other IPs on the internet. The other set in here are these SINs. The SINs Army lists, which provide different reputation scores, all based on global sensors. So that's why this stuff changes very regularly. So if I would run this tool today against that PCAP file that was generated in the past, the results would show differently. So I always do them at the exact same time. I update the threat feeds the day that I collect the PCAP files so I can get a good indicator of what's going on. Now here's where you see absolute definitive attribution. So all indicators in all three columns, those three columns were the ones that really were the top threat intelligence reputation scores. So you've got the DShield block on the left plus 2 reputations. It is uncategorical that we have active, persistent foothold from Russian-owned assets. And all of this could have been prevented very simply with very, very simple and straightforward tools. But what we needed to do is we needed to clean up house. So we had a problem because there's a signature on Shodan now. So now I need to wave my magic wand and make the Shodan data disappear. So how did we do that? We had a mechanical constraint. So I tried to put everybody, I wanted to be fair, those are most of the industrial firewalls. At least everyone I could find a reasonable picture for. But believe it or not, in that pile, of which I have 80% of those in my test bench, only one fitted the problem. Because I had a mechanical constraint, I only had 2 inches of DIN rail space, 24-volt power, no AC available, and it needed to replace a very small 4-port unmanaged switch. So I'm like, this is cool. So I ended up going with the mGuard product from Phoenix Contact, because they have a firewall, just like Hirschman, everybody else, that has integrated switches. So you kind of see those varieties. There's the Moxa one down there on the lower left. So it gave me the capability. The reason I wasn't able to pick any of these other ones, some of these products, like one of the most powerful ones there, this is the Cisco ISA on the top, but it's also significantly wider than the room that I had. So what was really cool, very easy project swap. You put the new device where the old switch used to be. You clean up the rules. I'm not going to prevent services from happening. So I'm going to have the web server that's on that panel still remain active, that you can act. The PLC can still be remotely programmed. But the one thing that I need to do is a role-based access mechanism. So now as we start to select, this is more than a firewall problem. Because what a lot of people would do is they would just put in a straight configuration rule that would allow both of those things to happen. No, I need dynamic rules. So that if it's me and I need to get into that system, I would use the dynamic rule that would enable configuration. But if it was the person that just needed to pull daily reports or view live operational data, they do not need to see the PLC. They don't need to interact with the PLC in any way. So pretty slick. One feature of the Phoenix Contact mGuard is what's called a user firewall. It allows you to build firewalls without knowing the IP address. A very powerful tool, especially in this remote access world. Because what happens is you create an account, you log in, and in this case it's either user or maintenance. The maintenance account would allow you to configure the PLC. The user account only allows a couple ports in order to go in and view the panel. So that's kind of the dynamic rule set on the bottom, the 2 adds. Gives me the port 9999, which is the panel configuration port service, and then the 44818, which is our Ethernet IP configuration against the PLC. But it's really nice because now, no matter where I'm at in the world, when I log in, The IP address that gets placed into the rule for that session is based on the IP address I just used to create that session. Really awesome tool. Now, the end result, it took 6 weeks. So as I analyze, you can always click the raw data in Shodan where you can see the much greater granularity. It was giving me indications that it would crawl this site about every 2 weeks. So I knew it would take at least 2 cycles for it to clear up, because when you look at the raw data section in the Shodan output, you'll see 2 full sets of data from the current crawl and then the one that was just immediately previous to that one. So on the 3rd crawl, which would have been at week 6, everything disappeared. And now all of a sudden, we cleaned up the panel, so I got rid of that customer name. We lost the industrial control system designator on Shodan. And we have a very clean looking ports and services description available through Shodan, because everything shut down until you log in. So in this particular case, you'll notice 2 ports. This is something that I really wish Sierra Wireless would fix. So the 2332 is their remote telnet session to go in and configure the modem. Even though that function is configured to be in a disabled state, they don't disable the service from showing up. And the 9191 brings up their web ACE manager interface to do the same thing. Again, there's nothing that will respond on those, which is why you don't see anything below, because there was no banner. The port's open, but there's no service responding to it. All we see is an indication that there's an mGuard there, so you can kind of see on the second line here, there's a little server is mGuard. That would show what that device is, so somebody would know that there's a security appliance there. But the good thing is again, remember this, the firewall is blocked entirely. The egress from the firewall into the control system is completely shut down until a user logs in, which is very different than a standard firewall where they would try to build rules and then those rules would allow specific access. So, 2 minutes and 30 seconds. There's a lot more to this that kind of gets into some of the hows and how the decisions were made and some of the command line tools, like on how you would feed the PCAP. If there's questions, I'll take questions. Otherwise, I can just keep kind of chatting. Perfect.
Yeah, hi. So I have a question, and mainly because I actually have some experience setting up systems just like these for some of the clients that I've dealt with. So believe it or not, one of the setups that I did actually did have Sierra Wireless in there, and it was atrociously difficult to configure good security for one of the modems that I had from Sierra Wireless. So the conversation that we had for one of the designs that I did was, so you have systems like these that are shipped with like, hey, you have a wireless modem from one manufacturer, a firewall from a different manufacturer, and a switch or a router inside the panel from another third manufacturer. So in terms of security, if you have a breach, it makes it difficult for the intruders to learn 3 different systems that they have to get past to eventually, say, compromise the asset, right? So one of the other moves that another client of mine did was they said, we'll go with an all-in-one product that is top of the line in terms of security. It's a firewall, router, cell phone, modem, all built into one, but the security is infinitely better than these disparate products. So now what that means is the attacker now has to compromise just one device to get back, to get into the asset. What are your thoughts on going with disparate manufacturers for setups like these versus just one manufacturer which has all-in-one functionality? Just wanted to hear your thoughts on that topic.
My personal preference is always to add a layer of security through diversity. So this is hands down one of the top 5 debates when you go in and engage with a client when you're talking a traditional information security posture versus an operational security. IT wants a single firewall. Okay, so you finally convince them that a stacked dual firewall provides 2 layers of protection. It allows separation of configuration management, Because I want to manage the firewall for my network, but IT wants to manage the firewall for their network. So then we get into this debate on should they be the same or separate. When they're the same, you have to remember that there is a common mode failure there, which is any vulnerability that exists in one will exist in the other. So I have always been a fan and encouraged people to do it through separation. Hardware costs are so low now. The cost to do this right was insignificant. Truly, if from an engineering, project engineering point of view, to do this right would have cost between $2,000 and $3,000 to acquire the device and to do the 30 minutes of configuration and testing around it. Now, what's really scary about this is that company is still in business. They went to Verizon and bought a block of SIM cards for those Sierra Wireless devices. So what they did when we started to do this investigation is we just incremented the IP address by 1. And sure enough, we found the site. And again, it absolutely identified the target in that header, because what this engineering firm did is they would put the customer's name as the project file for the Seymour panel. And the Seymour panel would take the project name and put it in the banner of the FTP server that's on it. And it's crazy, so this gets good. So I said, I wrote a custom Nessus plugin for this so I could do much broader scans. I found U.S. Department of Defense sites that were showing up on here. Natural gas fill-up stations for cars. Most of these were small-scale, little, they all technically fell into critical infrastructure because of who was operating them. But in addition to seeing remediation sites, you would see natural gas compression sites. You would see, the one that I thought was funny was defense logistics agencies. They had one of their yards that actually showed up on here. And you just walk right in the door, and you have full access. And these guys that are building the graphics do full attribution of the target and the graphics that are available on the internet. So you go to the port 80, you'll get a nice little graphic, you hit screen list, you've hit the first screen, and they put the client's name and what the site is and does. So in addition to having a nice graphic you can interact with, you also have all the goodies around who it is and what you're hitting and where it's at. So again, we can talk. This is really a fun conversation. I did bring that project file running so that if you wanted to kind of see how all this stuff worked and how it was built out, we can do that. But I know my time's up. I got the red light flashing now. Thank you. I know that we only got like one session left, and then we're going to go to the pool. So thank you.